Hello, I'm Maya. My family used to laugh when I came to Thanksgiving dinner still wearing my Walmart vest, calling me the retail girl who'd never amount to anything. They'd whisper about how embarrassing it was that their daughter worked at Walmart while my sister Jessica climbed the corporate ladder and my brother Michael graduated law school. What they didn't know was that every time they mocked my dead-end job, I was actually running a multi-million-dollar retail empire that owned 47 stores across 3 states, and their precious Walmart paycheck was funding my next acquisition. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn air in Riverside carried that familiar scent of burning leaves and anticipation as I pulled into my mother's driveway. November 23rd, 2023. Thanksgiving. The same holiday that had become an annual reminder of everything my family thought I wasn't. My Honda Civic looked pathetic next to Jessica's gleaming BMW and Michael's new Audi, but I'd grown used to that. What they saw was Maya the Walmart worker. What they couldn't see was Maya the business owner who'd just closed a deal to purchase 3 more struggling grocery stores in Nevada the week before. I sat in my car for a moment longer than necessary, adjusting the navy blue vest that had become my armor over the years. The Walmart logo felt heavier today, not because of shame, but because of the weight of the secret it carried. 7 years. 7 years of building something extraordinary while they saw only an ordinary girl in retail uniform. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed tired eyes and hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Nothing about my appearance suggested that the woman staring back owned a retail chain worth $38 million. The front door opened before I could knock. Mom appeared in her perfectly coordinated autumn sweater, the kind that probably cost more than most people made in a week. Her smile was warm but carried that familiar undertone of gentle disappointment she'd perfected over the years. "Maya, honey, you made it." She hugged me quickly, and I caught the subtle way her hand avoided touching my vest, as if the polyester might somehow transfer my lack of ambition to her designer clothes. "Traffic wasn't too bad," I replied, following her through the foyer where family photos lined the walls. Jessica's MBA graduation, Michael's law school ceremony. My high school graduation photo had been moved to a less prominent spot near the back, partially hidden behind a plant. Small details like that used to sting. Now they just reminded me why I'd learned to keep my achievements to myself. The dining room buzzed with the familiar sounds of family gathering. Jessica stood near the window, wine glass in hand, gesturing animatedly as she told Uncle David about her latest marketing campaign. Her voice carried that confident tone she'd developed since landing her job at the tech startup. Michael sat at the far end of the table, still in his crisp button-down shirt from his law firm, scrolling through his phone with the self-important air of someone who billed by the hour. "Look who finally showed up," Jessica called out, not unkindly, but with that edge that suggested she'd been holding court in my absence. "Still coming straight from work, I see." I nodded, taking the seat that had been left for me. It wasn't at the head of the table where Dad sat, or near the center where the real conversations happened. It was positioned between the kitchen, door and the wall, close enough to be family but far enough to be forgotten. The placement had become so routine over the years that I'd stopped questioning it. The table setting told its own story. Everyone else had the good china, the crystal glasses that caught the chandelier light, cloth napkins embroidered with Mom's initials. My place setting was different. Not obviously so, but different enough that I noticed. The plate was from the everyday set, the glass was plain, and my napkin was paper, folded neatly, but clearly not part of the formal service. "Maya works so hard," Mom said to Aunt Sophie, her voice carrying that particular tone parents use when they're trying to find something positive to say about a disappointing situation. "She's very dedicated to her job." "That's wonderful," Aunt Sophie replied, but I caught the quick glance she exchanged with Uncle David, the look that said they'd Discussed my situation before I arrived. Retail teaches you so much about people. Dad cleared his throat from the head of the table. At 58, Robert Chen had built a successful insurance business through sheer determination and what he called strategic networking. He believed in traditional paths to success, the kind that came with titles and corner offices. Maya's always been different, he said, cutting his turkey with precise movements. Some people are meant for corporate leadership. Others find their place in service roles. The word service hung in the air like smoke, not because service work was shameful, but because of how he said it. Like it was a consolation prize. Like it was what happened when you didn't have what it took for something bigger. At least she's employed, Michael added, not looking up from his phone. In this economy, that's something. Jessica laughed, the sound light and airy but sharp, around the edges. I keep telling her she should use her employee discount to buy some professional clothes. Maybe think about applying for management positions. Walmart promotes from within, right? I took a sip of water, letting the coolness settle on my tongue. Before responding, something like that. The conversation moved on, as it always did, to Jessica's latest promotion opportunity and Michael's newest case. I listened to them discuss quarterly projections and billing hours, market strategies, and client acquisitions. The language of success, as they understood it. Traditional success with traditional markers, college degrees and corporate ladders, and titles that impressed at dinner parties. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that while they were climbing those ladders, I'd been building my own mountain. Every day I spent at Walmart wasn't just a job. It was research, market analysis. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Understanding supply chains and customer behavior and operational efficiency from the ground up. While they were learning theory in conference rooms, I was learning reality on retail floors. Maya, you're quiet tonight, Dad observed, finally turning his attention my way. Everything okay at work? Work's fine, I replied. Actually, it's been really interesting lately. Interesting how? Mom asked, her tone suggesting she was hoping for news of a promotion or maybe a transfer to something more respectable. I considered telling them about the Nevada acquisition, about the distribution center expansion I'd approved that morning, about the quarterly report showing 18% growth across all store locations. Instead, I said, just learning a lot about retail operations. Uncle David nodded approvingly. That's good. Understanding the basics will serve you well if you ever decide to move into something more substantial. More substantial. As if the business I'd built from nothing, the hundreds of employees whose families depended on the jobs I'd created, the communities I'd helped revitalize with strategically, placed stores wasn't substantial, as if substantial could only be measured in law degrees and marketing presentations. Maybe you should think about going back to school, Aunt Sophie suggested gently. It's never too late to change direction. Or at least apply for a supervisor position, Jessica added. You've been there long enough. They must trust you by now. They must trust you by now. If they only knew that Walmart Corporate had been courting me for months, trying to understand how a small-town chain was consistently outperforming their projections in the exact markets where their own stores struggled. If they only knew that, I'd turned down 3 acquisition offers from major retailers because I wasn't ready to sell what I'd built. I'm actually pretty happy where I am, I said. Michael finally looked up from his phone. You can't be serious about making a career out of retail. Why not? Because you're smart, Maya. You could do so much more. So much more. The phrase echoed in my mind as I watched my brother's earnest expression. He genuinely believed he was being encouraging. They all did. They saw a woman in a Walmart vest who needed saving from her own limited ambitions. They couldn't see the entrepreneur who'd identified a gap in the market and filled it, who'd taken calculated risks and built something extraordinary from the ground up. The thing about being underestimated is that it becomes invisible armor. While they worried about my future, I was already living it. While they discussed what I should do with my life, I was busy changing theirs in ways they'd never understand. Every time one of them shopped at any grocery store in California, Nevada, or Arizona, they were contributing to an economy I'd helped shape. But that story was too big for their understanding of who I was supposed to be. Dinner continued with its familiar rhythm. Jessica talked about her upcoming presentation to potential investors. Michael discussed a corporate merger he was working on. Mom shared news about her latest real estate listings. Dad offered advice about networking and professional development. I listened and nodded and played my part as the family member who needed guidance rather than the one who could have offered it. Dessert arrived with the same ceremonial importance Mom had always attached to her homemade apple pie. The recipe had been passed down from her grandmother, she reminded us, as she did every year. Tradition mattered in our family, lineage and legacy and doing things the right way, which made my unconventional path even more difficult for them to understand. "I have some news," Jessica announced as Mom served the pie. "I'm being considered for the vice president position at my company." The table erupted in congratulations and questions. What would her new responsibilities be? How much of a salary increase? When would she find out? The excitement was genuine and warm, the kind of celebration that happens when someone achieves something the whole family can understand and be proud of. "That's incredible, sweetheart," Dad beamed. "Vice president before 35? That's the kind of trajectory that leads to executive positions." "I'm so proud," Mom added, reaching over to squeeze Jessica's hand. "My daughter, the VP, Michael," raised his water glass in a mock toast to Jessica, who always knew how to aim high. I clapped along with everyone else, genuinely happy for my sister's success. But I couldn't help noticing the contrast. When Jessica got promoted, it was cause for celebration. When I mentioned that work was interesting, it was cause for concern. Their pride in her achievements was matched only by their worry about my apparent lack of them. "What about you, Maya?" Jessica asked, turning the attention my way with what I recognized as generous inclusion. "Any exciting developments in your world?" I could have told them about the Henderson Valley store that had become the highest grossing location in its market within 18 months of my acquisition. I could have mentioned the partnership agreement I'd signed with a regional organic produce distributor that was revolutionizing our fresh food offerings. I could have shared the industry recognition I'd received for innovative small-format retail solutions in underserved communities. Instead, I said, "Nothing as exciting as yours." "Well, maybe this will inspire you to think bigger," Uncle David suggested. Jessica's success shows what's possible when you really apply yourself. Apply yourself, as if I hadn't been applying myself every day for 7 years. As if building a business from nothing required less application than climbing a corporate ladder someone else had built. As if the 60-hour weeks I'd spent learning every aspect of retail operations, from inventory management to customer service to financial planning, somehow counted less than the hours they'd spent in meetings and presentations. The conversation eventually shifted to other topics: holiday plans and family updates and the general chatter that fills the spaces between more significant discussions. I participated where appropriate, asked questions, showed interest in their lives and achievements. But part of my mind was elsewhere, calculating numbers and considering strategies and thinking about the Monday morning meeting where I'd review expansion plans for the coming year. As the evening wound down, the familiar ritual of clearing dishes and wrapping leftovers began. I moved to help, as I always did, grateful for the activity and the excuse to step away from the table. In the kitchen, away from the formal dining room, the atmosphere was slightly different, less performative, more genuine. "You know we just want what's best for you," Mom said quietly as she handed me plates to rinse. "You're so smart, Maya. We hate to see you selling yourself short." Selling myself short. The irony wasn't lost on me. While she worried about me selling myself short, I was literally selling products through stores I owned to customers who had no idea they were supporting a business built by the quiet woman in the Walmart vest. While she feared I wasn't reaching my potential, I was exceeding projections that established retailers couldn't match. "I know, Mom," I replied, because what else could I say? How do you explain that the very thing they see as limitation has become your greatest strength? How do you tell people who love you that their concern for your future is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of who you are? The drive home was quiet, just the sound of tires on pavement, and my thoughts looping through the evening's conversations. The familiar weight of being misunderstood settled over me like a comfortable blanket. 7 years of family gatherings, where I played the role of the underachieving daughter while building something none of them could have imagined. 7 years of letting them believe their version of my story while I lived the real one. My apartment in Corona was a deliberate choice in maintaining my cover. Nothing fancy, nothing that would raise questions about how a Walmart employee could afford more. The furniture was practical rather than impressive, the decorations minimal and unremarkable. But in the bedroom closet, behind the clothes that supported my public persona, hung a single suit. Black, perfectly tailored, with a silk blouse that cost more than most people spent on an entire outfit. That was the uniform I wore to board meetings and acquisition negotiations and strategy sessions, where my opinion shaped decisions affecting thousands of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. I hung up my Walmart vest carefully, as I did every night. Tomorrow I'd put it on again and return to the role that had become both my disguise and my strength. In 3 days, I had a conference call with potential investors interested in supporting my expansion into the Texas market. Next week, I was flying to Phoenix to review 2 properties that could become the foundation for our Arizona growth strategy. But tonight, I was just Maya Chen, the family disappointment who worked at Walmart and needed to think bigger. The contradiction no longer bothered me the way it once had. In fact, it had become my greatest advantage. While my competitors worried about their public image and their market perception, I was free to work without the burden of expectations. While they spent energy managing their reputations, I focused on managing results. Being underestimated had taught me to over-deliver in silence, to build power without announcing it, to succeed without seeking approval. As I prepared for bed, I thought about Tyler, my 16-year-old nephew who would be joining the family for Christmas dinner in a few weeks. Unlike the adults in our family, Tyler had always seen me differently. Maybe because he was young enough to look past surface appearances, or maybe because he'd inherited some genetic predisposition toward recognizing potential that others missed. Either way, his faith in me had been one of the few constants during the years when I questioned whether I was making the right choices. The text message on my phone interrupted my thoughts. Emma Rodriguez, my CFO and business partner, sending the quarterly summary I'd requested. Revenue up 22% from the previous year. Profit margins exceeding industry standards across all store locations. Employee satisfaction scores in the top 10% of retail businesses nationwide. Customer loyalty metrics that made established chains take notice and wonder what we were doing differently. What we were doing differently was simple. We treated retail as more than just moving products. We created community gathering places where people felt valued and understood. We hired locally and promoted from within and invested in employee development programs that other companies considered too expensive. We sourced products from regional suppliers whenever possible and supported local business ecosystems that strengthened entire communities. The irony wasn't lost on me that the family who worried about my lack of ambition had no idea they were beneficiaries of an economic philosophy that prioritized people over pure profit. The success they couldn't see in my life was literally supporting the lifestyle they'd built. The stores I owned employed people from their neighborhoods, supported suppliers they interacted with, and contributed to tax bases that funded services they used. But that story was too complex for a Thanksgiving dinner conversation, too nuanced for people who measured success in traditional metrics and familiar achievements. They needed me to be the person who worked at Walmart, not the person who understood Walmart well enough to build something better. They needed me to be the daughter who required guidance, not the entrepreneur who could have offered it. So I let them have their version of the story while I lived the real one. Tomorrow I'd put on my vest and return to the role that had become my greatest teacher and my most effective disguise. I'd walk the floors and observe customer behavior and analyze operational efficiency and continue learning from the ground up while my family worried about my future and my competitors underestimated my present. The last thing I did before turning off the light was check my calendar for the next day. Friday meant inventory review at the Hemet location, followed by a conference call with the Nevada regional managers, then a late afternoon meeting with the architect designing our newest store format. A full day of decisions and strategy and building something bigger than what anyone expected from a woman in a Walmart vest. Being underestimated had taught me patience. Soon enough, they would understand. Soon enough, the truth would reveal itself in ways that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. But until that moment arrived, I was content to let them believe their version of who I was while I continued becoming who I was meant to be. The retail industry was evolving, and I was helping to shape that evolution one store at a time, one community at a time, one decision at a time. While my family worried about my career trajectory, I was creating career opportunities for hundreds of other people who understood that real success couldn't be measured only in titles and degrees. That night, as sleep finally came, I dreamed of the warehouse in San Bernardino where it all began 7 years ago. Just me and a business plan that everyone said was too ambitious for someone with my background and my resources. The same people who'd encouraged me to think bigger had no idea how big I'd already learned to think. The morning after Thanksgiving arrived gray and cold, the kind of November day that makes you want to stay under the covers and pretend the world doesn't exist. But at 5:30 a.m., my alarm buzzed with its usual persistence, and I rolled out of bed to face another day of living two lives. The routine had become second nature after 7 years. Shower, coffee, toast with peanut butter, then the transformation that turned Maya the business owner into Maya the Walmart employee. Standing in front of my bathroom mirror, I practiced the expression I'd wear for the next 8 hours. Not too confident, not too defeated. Just the right balance of someone who was grateful for steady work, but hadn't quite figured out how to aim higher. It was a performance that required more skill than most people realized. Too much enthusiasm, and they'd wonder why I wasn't pursuing management. Too little, and they'd worry I was depressed or giving up entirely. The Walmart vest slipped over my shoulders like armor, navy blue polyester that had become my most effective disguise. In boardrooms and investor meetings, I wore tailored suits that commanded respect and attention. But here, in this vest, I was invisible in the most powerful way possible. Customers saw a helpful employee. Management saw a reliable worker. Competitors who shopped our stores saw exactly what they expected to see and nothing more. The drive to the Riverside Supercenter took 23 minutes in morning traffic, winding through neighborhoods where families were just beginning their Black Friday routines. Some would spend the day fighting crowds for deals they'd planned, for weeks. Others would avoid the chaos entirely, preferring to shop online from their comfortable homes. What none of them knew was that their shopping patterns, their preferences, their behaviors were all data points in a larger strategy that I'd been studying and applying for years. Marcus Thompson was already at the store when I arrived, clipboard in hand, reviewing the overnight restocking reports. As the store manager, Marcus had worked his way up through the Walmart system over 15 years, and he'd become one of the few people who suspected there was more to my story than met the eye. Not because I'd told him anything, but because he'd noticed things. The way I analyzed customer flow patterns during my breaks. The questions I asked about supply chain logistics that went beyond what most floor associates needed to know. The occasional phone calls I took during lunch that sounded more like business negotiations than personal conversations. "Maya, good." "Morning?" He greeted me with the kind of professional warmth that had made him an effective manager. "How was your Thanksgiving?" "Quiet family dinner," I replied, which was technically true if you ignored all the underlying dynamics. "How were the overnight numbers?" Marcus glanced at his clipboard, then back at me with that slightly puzzled expression I'd grown accustomed to. "Strong sales in electronics and home goods, some interesting patterns in the grocery section that I've been wanting to discuss with someone who understands customer behavior." This was Marcus's subtle way of acknowledging that my insights often went beyond what he expected from someone in my official position. Over the years, we'd developed an informal consultation relationship where he'd bounce ideas off me and I'd offer observations that somehow always proved useful. He never questioned why a floor associate had such sophisticated understanding of retail dynamics. I never offered explanations that would complicate our working relationship. "I'll take a look at the grocery numbers during my break," I told him, already mentally calculating how that data would inform the product mix decisions I'd be making for my own stores later that week. The Black Friday crowd began filtering in. Around 7 a.m., earlier than usual, but not unexpected given the promotional calendar. I positioned myself in the electronics section where I could observe purchasing patterns while assisting customers with their questions. Each interaction was a lesson in consumer psychology that I'd apply to my own business operations. How people responded to different price points. Which promotional strategies actually influenced buying decisions. What combination of factors made customers choose one product over another? A middle-aged woman approached with a confused expression, holding 2 tablets and looking overwhelmed by the technical specifications. "Excuse me. Could you help me understand the difference between these?" For the next 15 minutes, I walked her through processor speeds and storage capacity and battery life, translating technical jargon into practical benefits that mattered for her specific needs. By the time she made her decision, she wasn't just buying a tablet. She was investing in a solution that would actually work for her lifestyle. That interaction represented everything I'd learned about customer service during my years in retail. People didn't want to be sold products. They wanted to be understood and helped toward decisions that would genuinely improve their lives. "Thank you so much," she said as I rang up her purchase. "You really know your stuff. Have you thought about working in technology sales?" "I'm happy where I am," I replied, with a smile that was only partially manufactured. The truth was, I was happy where I was, just not for the reasons she assumed. Every day at Walmart taught me something new about retail operations that I could apply to my own business. Every customer interaction refined my understanding of what people actually wanted versus what companies thought they should want. During my lunch break, I walked to my car and made the phone call that would transform my afternoon. "Emma, it's Maya. How did the Henderson numbers look this morning?" Emma Rodriguez had been my business partner for 3 years, ever since I'd realized that growing beyond a handful of stores required expertise I didn't possess. She'd come from a background in corporate finance, but she'd grown tired of helping large companies become more efficient at disappointing their employees and customers. When I'd offered her the opportunity to help build something different, something that prioritized community impact alongside profit margins, she'd jumped at the chance. "Henderson's up 18% from last Friday," Emma reported, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd correctly predicted a successful outcome. "The local produce partnership is exceeding projections. Customers are responding exactly how you said they would." Henderson Valley had been our testing ground for a new approach to grocery retail that emphasized local suppliers and community connections. Instead of relying entirely on large distributors, we'd partnered with regional farms and producers to offer products that couldn't be found in traditional chain stores. The strategy required more complex logistics and higher upfront costs, but it created customer loyalty that translated into sustainable profit margins. "What about the Arizona locations?" I asked. watching a group of Walmart employees enjoy their lunch in the break area visible through the store windows. Are we still on track for the Phoenix opening? Better than on track. The construction timeline moved up by 2 weeks, and we've already received applications from over 200 potential employees. The community response has been incredible. This was the part of my work that my family couldn't understand because they'd never seen it. The Phoenix store would be our 48th location, but it wouldn't just be another retail outlet. We'd spent months researching the community needs, identifying gaps in the local economy, and designing a store format that would create jobs while serving customers who'd been underserved by traditional retailers. The application numbers Emma mentioned represented families who would have new opportunities because of decisions I was making while wearing a Walmart vest. Schedule a call with the Phoenix team for Monday morning, I instructed. I want to review the hiring timeline and make sure we're prioritizing local candidates. Already on your calendar. Also, we got another acquisition inquiry yesterday. A chain in Colorado with 12 locations. Send me the preliminary analysis, but don't commit to anything yet. I want to understand their employee retention numbers and community impact metrics before we consider expanding into a new state. After ending the call, I sat in my car for a few extra minutes, processing the contrast between my two worlds. Inside the Walmart, I was Maya Chen, reliable employee who needed encouragement to think bigger. Outside, in phone calls and emails, and conference rooms my family would never see, I was Maya Chen, CEO of a growing retail empire that was reshaping how communities experienced grocery shopping. The afternoon shift brought a different energy to the store. Black Friday shoppers had given way to more deliberate customers who knew exactly what they wanted and moved through the aisles with purpose. I used this quieter period to observe inventory, management processes, and customer service interactions. Always learning, always analyzing how different approaches affected outcomes. Around 3 p.m., an incident occurred that reminded me why I'd chosen to build something different from the corporate retail model. A customer became frustrated with a return policy that seemed designed more to protect the company than to solve problems. The interaction escalated until Marcus had to intervene, and even then, the customer left dissatisfied while the employee looked stressed and defeated. In my stores, we'd implemented return policies that prioritized customer satisfaction and employee empowerment. Instead of rigid rules that created conflict, we trained our staff to find solutions that worked for everyone involved. It cost more, in the short term, but it created the kind of customer loyalty that traditional retailers struggled to achieve. More importantly, it created work environments where employees felt trusted and valued rather than trapped between corporate policies and human needs. The end of my shift approached with the familiar mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. 8. Hours of being Maya the employee were coming to a close, which meant I could transition back to being Maya the entrepreneur. But tonight would be different. Tonight, I had a dinner meeting with a potential investor who was interested in supporting our expansion into the Texas market. I changed clothes in my car, trading the Walmart vest for a black blazer that transformed my entire appearance. The woman who emerged from that car looked nothing like the employee who'd spent the day helping customers and restocking shelves. This version of Maya commanded attention and respect in rooms where million-dollar decisions were made. The restaurant in downtown Riverside was the kind of place where business deals happened over expensive wine and carefully prepared food. I arrived exactly on time, as was my habit, and was escorted to a corner table where I could see the entire dining room. A strategic choice that allowed me to observe other conversations and maintain awareness of my surroundings while discussing confidential business matters. Richard Sullivan was already waiting, a man in his early 60s whose investment portfolio included several successful retail ventures. He'd reached out through Emma after hearing about our unusual approach to community-focused retail. What interested him wasn't just our profit margins, though those were impressive. He was intrigued by our employee retention rates and customer satisfaction scores that consistently exceeded industry standards. Maya, Thank you for meeting me on such short notice, Richard said as I sat down. I've been reading about your Henderson Valley results, and I have to admit, I'm curious about how you're achieving these numbers. For the next 2 hours, we discussed business models and growth strategies and market penetration theories. I explained how prioritizing employee satisfaction created customer experiences that traditional retailers couldn't match, how investing in local communities generated loyalty that transcended price competition, how treating retail as relationship building rather than transaction processing created sustainable competitive advantages. Richard listened with the attention of someone who'd spent decades recognizing profitable opportunities, but also with the surprise of someone discovering approaches he hadn't previously considered. Most retail executives focus on cost reduction and efficiency maximization, he observed. You're talking about deliberate investments in areas that most companies see as expense centers. Because most companies measure success quarterly, I replied. We measure success generationally. An employee who feels valued and empowered creates customer experiences that build lifelong relationships. A community that benefits from local sourcing and hiring becomes invested in your success. Those relationships generate revenue streams that quarterly-focused companies never access. The conversation continued over dessert and coffee, covering expansion timelines and investment structures and partnership possibilities. By the time we shook hands in the restaurant parking lot, Richard had committed to supporting our Texas expansion with a 7-figure investment that would allow us to acquire and convert 15 existing stores over the next 18 months. Driving home, I reflected on the strangeness of my double life. This morning, I'd been a Walmart employee whose family worried about her career prospects. Tonight, I'd secured funding for an expansion that would create hundreds of jobs and serve communities across 3 new metropolitan areas. The woman my family saw and the woman Richard had negotiated with were the same person, but they inhabited completely different worlds. My phone buzzed with a text message from Tyler, my nephew. Aunt Maya, how was your Black Friday? Mom said you worked at Walmart today. That must have been crazy busy. I smiled at his message, one of the few family communications that didn't carry undertones of concern or disappointment. Tyler had always treated my work with genuine interest rather than thinly veiled worry. When he asked about my job, he wanted to hear about the actual experiences rather than reassurance that I was planning to move on to something better. It was busy but good, I texted back. Learned a lot about customer behavior. How was your day? Helped Mom with some shopping. Saw this documentary about entrepreneurs who started with nothing and built amazing companies. Made me think of you. Made me think of you. Those 5 words carried more validation than anything I'd heard at yesterday's Thanksgiving dinner. Tyler didn't know about my business empire or my investment meetings or my expansion plans, but somehow he'd recognized something in me that the adults in our family had missed, some quality or potential that suggested I was capable of more than they imagined. What did you like about the documentary? I asked. How they all started by really understanding their industries from the ground up. Like, they didn't just have ideas. They learned everything about how things actually worked before they tried to change anything. His observation was remarkably insightful for a 16-year-old and remarkably accurate for my own journey. 7 years ago, when I'd first conceived the idea of building a different kind of retail business, I'd known almost nothing about actual store operations. The Walmart job had been my graduate school, teaching me everything from inventory management to customer psychology to supply chain logistics. What my family saw as career stagnation had actually been the most intensive business education possible. That's a smart way to think about it, I replied. Sometimes the best preparation doesn't look like preparation to other people. Exactly. Hey, can I ask you something? Do you ever think about starting your own business? You know so much about retail and you understand people really well. Tyler's question hit closer to home than he could have known. Here was a teenager who'd identified entrepreneurial potential that MBA-educated adults had missed. Someone who saw my retail experience as valuable foundation rather than career limitation. Someone who asked about my dreams rather than expressing concern about my current situation. I think about it sometimes, I answered honestly. What kind of business do you think I should start? Something with stores, but better than the ones that exist now. Like stores that actually care about their communities and their employees. You always notice things about how businesses could work better. Tyler's vision was remarkably close to what I'd already built. A network of stores that prioritized community connection and employee satisfaction alongside profit generation. Retail businesses that measured success by their impact on people's lives rather than just their quarterly earnings reports. The kind of company that created career opportunities for people like the woman my family thought I was. That's an interesting idea, I replied. Maybe someday I'll give it a try. I think you'd be really good at it. You see things differently than most people. After ending our text conversation, I sat in my apartment reflecting on the contrast between Tyler's faith in my potential and my family's concern about my choices. A 16-year-old had recognized entrepreneurial capability that successful adults had overlooked. Someone who barely understood business had identified exactly the kind of venture I'd been building for years. The weekend stretched ahead with its usual mixture of public retail work and private business development. Saturday meant another shift at Walmart, observing customer patterns and learning operational details that would inform strategic decisions. Sunday meant conference calls with regional managers and review meetings with department heads and planning sessions for the upcoming quarter. 2 different worlds, 2 different versions of success, 2 different measures of what mattered. My family saw a woman who needed to think bigger. My business partners saw a leader who'd already thought bigger than anyone expected. My customers saw a helpful employee. My investors saw a visionary entrepreneur. The truth contained elements of all those perceptions while being larger than any single one of them. I was building something that couldn't be easily categorized or quickly understood, something that required patience and persistence and the willingness to be misunderstood while working toward goals that others couldn't see. Soon enough, the 2 worlds would collide in ways that couldn't be ignored or explained away. Soon enough, my family would discover that their concern for my future had been based on incomplete information about my present. But until that moment arrived, I was content to let them worry while I continued building something worth discovering. The retail industry was changing, and I was part of that change. Communities were searching for businesses that understood their needs, and I was creating those businesses 1 store at a time. Employees were looking for work environments that valued their contributions, and I was designing those environments based on everything I'd learned about what people actually wanted from their careers. My family wanted me to think bigger, not realizing I'd already learned to think bigger than they could imagine. They wanted me to aim higher, not understanding that I'd been aiming at targets they couldn't see. They wanted me to become someone significant, not recognizing that I'd already become someone whose decisions affected thousands of lives in ways they'd never considered. The Walmart vest hanging in my closet represented more than just a job, or even a disguise. It was a symbol of everything I'd learned about building from the ground up, understanding industries from the inside out, and creating value through service rather than just strategy. Tomorrow I'd put it on again and continue my education in an industry I was helping to reshape. But tonight, I was Maya Chen, CEO of Valley Fresh Markets, planning an expansion that would bring jobs and services to communities across multiple states. The woman my family worried about and the woman investors sought out were the same person, living parallel lives that would eventually converge in ways none of us could predict. The convergence was coming sooner than I expected, triggered by a single photograph that would change everything. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of December day that made Southern California feel almost seasonal. I was adjusting my name tag in the employee break room when Sarah Kim walked through the door, her regional manager badge catching the fluorescent light. Sarah and I had history that went back to my earliest days at Walmart. when she was just another floor associate trying to make sense of retail chaos, and I was the new hire who asked too many questions about supply chain efficiency. "Maya Chen," she said with a grin that carried genuine warmth. "I heard you were still here. 7 years and counting, right?" "Something like that," I replied, straightening my vest. Sarah had climbed the corporate ladder the traditional way, earning promotions through a combination of hard work, strategic networking, and the kind of visibility that came from speaking. Up in meetings and volunteering for high-profile projects. What she didn't know was that while she'd been building her career within Walmart's structure, I'd been building an entirely separate business that competed with everything she now managed. "I'm here for the quarterly efficiency review," she explained, checking her tablet with the focused attention of someone who'd learned to juggle multiple priorities. "Marcus mentioned you've been really helpful with customer flow analysis. Mind if I pick your brain about some patterns we've been seeing across the region?" This was the dangerous territory I'd learned to navigate carefully over the years. Sarah's questions were always insightful, sometimes touching on insights that came uncomfortably close to revealing the depth of my retail knowledge. But they also provided opportunities to gather intelligence about Walmart's regional strategies, information that helped me position my own stores more effectively in the marketplace. "Sure," I agreed, following her toward the customer service area where we could observe Saturday morning shopping patterns. "What kind of patterns are you seeing?" Sarah pulled up a series of charts on her tablet, data visualizations that showed customer traffic flows, purchase timing, and demographic breakdowns across multiple store locations. "We're seeing some interesting shifts in grocery purchasing behavior. Customers seem to be gravitating toward stores that offer more local product options, even when the prices are slightly higher. Corporate wants to understand what's driving that trend." I studied the charts with the careful attention of someone who'd been tracking similar patterns for years, though from a very different perspective. What Sarah was seeing as mysterious consumer behavior was actually the result of strategic decisions I'd been implementing across my own store network. Local sourcing, community partnerships, and employee empowerment programs that created shopping experiences traditional chains couldn't match. "Have you considered that customers might be responding to more than just product selection?" I asked carefully. "Sometimes people choose where to shop based on how they feel about the experience, not just what's available on the shelves." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That's what some of our customer satisfaction surveys suggest, but it's hard to quantify emotional responses in ways that translate to actionable business strategies." "What if you looked at employee satisfaction metrics alongside customer satisfaction data?" I suggested. "There might be correlations that aren't obvious when you examine them separately." This was treacherous ground, offering insights that could potentially help Walmart compete more effectively against businesses like mine. But Sarah had always been someone I respected, and her questions suggested she was asking the right kinds of questions, even if she didn't yet understand the full scope of what she was investigating. "That's actually brilliant," Sarah said, making notes on her tablet. "Most regional analyses focus on customer metrics without considering employee engagement factors. You really should think about applying for a management track position, Maya. Your analytical thinking is way beyond what most floor associates bring to these conversations." Management track position. The suggestion carried the weight of good intentions and genuine respect for my capabilities. Sarah saw potential in me that my family had missed, recognizing analytical skills that could translate into corporate advancement. What she couldn't see was that I'd already applied those skills to building something bigger than any management position could offer. "I'm actually pretty content where I am," I replied, which had become my standard response to career advancement. Suggestions. "But I appreciate you recognizing that I might have insights worth considering." The morning continued with its familiar rhythm of customer interactions and inventory management, but Sarah's presence added an element of performance that required constant attention. Regional managers noticed things that store-level supervisors missed. They looked for patterns and anomalies that might indicate larger issues or opportunities. Having Sarah observe my work while knowing what I actually did beyond these walls created a tension that was both exhilarating and exhausting. Around 11 a.m., a situation developed that tested the boundaries of my carefully maintained cover. A customer approached with a complex return request involving a defective electronic device that had been purchased several months earlier. The standard return policy wouldn't accommodate his situation, but Marcus was tied up with other responsibilities, and the customer was becoming increasingly frustrated. "Let me see what I can do," I told the customer, stepping into a problem-solving role that felt natural despite being technically outside my official responsibilities. "Can you tell me more about what happened with the device?" For the next 15 minutes, I walked through options that most floor associates wouldn't have known existed: alternative warranty programs, manufacturer direct exchanges, store credit, alternatives that could address his needs while staying within corporate guidelines. By the time we reached a solution that satisfied everyone involved, the customer was thanking me profusely, and Sarah was watching with the focused attention of someone trying to understand what she'd just witnessed. "Maya," Sarah said quietly. After the customer left, "That was some pretty sophisticated customer service. You navigated policies and options that most store managers would need to look up." "I've been here long enough to learn the system," I replied, which was true but incomplete. What I'd actually done was apply customer service principles I'd developed for my own stores, approaches that prioritized solution finding over rule following while still maintaining operational integrity. Still, that level of policy knowledge, combined with your analytical insights, suggests you're really underutilizing your potential here. Sarah's observation hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I couldn't address without revealing information that would complicate everything. She was recognizing capabilities that exceeded my official position, which was exactly the kind of attention I'd worked years to avoid. But her recognition also felt validating in ways that my family's concern never had. "Maybe I just pay attention to details that other people miss," I suggested. "Maybe you do. But Maya, paying attention to details is exactly what separates good employees from great leaders." During my lunch break, I walked to my car and immediately called Emma to debrief the morning's interactions. "We might have a situation developing," I told her without preamble. "Sarah Kim from Walmart Regional Management is asking questions that suggest they're starting to notice market shifts that correlate with our expansion strategy." "How close are her questions getting to identifying us as competition?" Emma asked, her voice carrying the practical concern of someone who'd spent years managing competitive intelligence in corporate environments. "Not close enough to be immediate concerns, but close enough that we need to be more careful about how we position future store openings." She's specifically looking at customer preference shifts toward local sourcing and community-focused retail experiences. "Which is exactly what we've been building," Emma observed. "Should we consider accelerating our expansion timeline to establish stronger market positions before they adapt their strategies?" This was the strategic thinking that had made Emma such a valuable partner. She understood that competitive advantages were temporary, especially when larger companies had resources to copy successful innovations once they recognized them. Our window for establishing market dominance in key regions might be narrower than we'd originally projected. "Schedule a call with the regional managers for Monday morning," I decided. "I want to review all current expansion projects and identify any locations where we need to move faster to secure advantageous positioning." "Already on it. Also, I've been thinking about something Tyler mentioned in your family group chat." I paused, surprised that Emma would reference my family communications. "What about Tyler?" "He posted something about entrepreneurship and starting businesses from the ground up. It got me wondering whether he might be someone worth considering for our college internship program next year." The idea of Tyler working for my company, even as an intern, opened possibilities I hadn't previously considered. He'd shown more insight into business potential than the adults in my family, and his questions suggested genuine interest in understanding how successful enterprises actually developed. But involving him would also create risks around maintaining the separation between my two worlds. Let me think about that, I told Emma. There are family dynamics that would need to be considered carefully. Of course, I just thought his perspective might be valuable, especially for our community engagement initiatives. After ending the call, I sat in my car considering the convergence of factors that seemed to be accelerating despite my efforts to maintain. Careful separation. Sarah's questions about market trends. Emma's suggestion about Tyler. My family's ongoing concern about my career trajectory. Forces that had been moving independently were starting to intersect in ways that might soon make my double life unsustainable. The afternoon brought a different kind of challenge when Jessica unexpectedly appeared in the electronics section where I was helping customers with holiday shopping decisions. She was dressed in her weekend casual clothes, designer jeans, and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people earned in a week, but she looked genuinely happy to see me. "Maya, I thought that was you," she said with a smile that seemed more authentic than most of our recent interactions. "I'm doing some last-minute shopping for Christmas gifts. Do you have a few minutes to help me figure out what to get Mom and Dad?" This was the version of Jessica I remembered from childhood, before career pressures and family expectations had created the competitive dynamics that now characterized most of our interactions. The sister who'd asked for my advice about school projects and relationship problems and life decisions she couldn't figure out alone. "Sure," I replied, genuinely pleased to help with something that felt like normal sibling interaction. "What kinds of things are you considering?" For the next hour, we walked through the store discussing gift options and family preferences, and shared memories that reminded me why I loved my sister despite the complicated dynamics that had developed over the years. Jessica had always been driven and ambitious, qualities I admired even when they created distance between us. What I'd never been able to explain was that I shared those same qualities, just expressed in ways she couldn't recognize. "You know," Jessica said as we examined potential gifts for our parents, "I was thinking about our conversation at Thanksgiving. I might have come across as dismissive about your work here, and I didn't mean to sound condescending." "It's okay," I replied, touched by her attempt to address the underlying tensions. "I know you're just concerned about me." "I am concerned, but maybe not for the reasons you think. It's not that I don't respect what you do here. It's that I can see how smart you are, and sometimes I wonder if you're holding yourself back for reasons I don't understand." Jessica's observation was perceptive in ways that surprised me. She'd recognized something that our parents had missed, some sense that my choices might be more deliberate than they appeared. But she was also interpreting my situation through the lens of traditional career advancement, unable to imagine alternatives that didn't fit conventional success metrics. "What if I told you I was exactly where I wanted to be?" I asked carefully. "Then I'd ask you to help me understand why, because it doesn't match what I know about your capabilities and ambitions." We paused near the customer service desk, surrounded by holiday shoppers and seasonal decorations and the general chaos of retail during peak shopping season. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to tell Jessica the truth about what I'd built and why her concern was based on incomplete information. But revealing my business empire would require explanations that would inevitably lead to questions about why I'd kept it secret, conversations that would expose the family dynamics that had made secrecy feel necessary. "Maybe someday I'll be able to explain it better," I said instead. "For now, I hope you can trust that I'm making choices that make sense for my life, even if they don't make sense from the outside." Jessica studied my face with the attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "You know." "What, Maya?" "I'm going to stop worrying about your career decisions and start trusting that you know what you're doing. You've always been more thoughtful than the rest of us give you credit for." Her words carried more validation than she could have known. Jessica had just acknowledged something that years of family gatherings and career conversations had overlooked. That my choices might be based on thoughtful consideration, rather than lack of ambition or direction. That my quiet approach to life might reflect strategic thinking rather than limited vision. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means more to me than you probably realize." As Jessica completed her purchases and prepared to leave, she paused at the exit to look back at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "Maya, whatever you're really up to, I hope you know that I'm proud of you. Maybe I don't understand your path, but I can see that you're walking it with purpose." Her parting comment lingered in my mind for the rest of my shift, adding another layer to the increasingly complex emotional landscape I was navigating. Jessica had offered recognition and support without requiring full disclosure, creating space for me to be authentic without demanding explanations I wasn't ready to provide. The end of my Saturday shift arrived with the familiar mixture of exhaustion and relief that came from maintaining performance while processing the day's unexpected emotional developments. Sarah's questions about market trends, Jessica's recognition of my deliberate choices, and the ongoing tension between my public role and private reality all contributed to a growing sense that the careful balance I'd maintained for 7 years was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. Driving home, I reflected on the strange irony of my situation. The more successful my business became, the more questions arose about why I continued working at Walmart. The more recognition I received for my analytical capabilities, the more people wondered why I wasn't pursuing traditional advancement opportunities. Success was making my cover story less believable rather than more sustainable. My phone buzzed with a text message from Tyler. "Aunt Maya, saw Aunt Jessica at the mall today. She said you helped her with Christmas shopping and that you really know your stuff about retail. Made me think again about that business idea we talked about." Tyler's message reminded me that he'd been thinking about entrepreneurship since our conversation after Thanksgiving. His continued interest in business development, combined with his apparent respect for my retail knowledge, suggested he might be exactly the kind of person who could understand what I'd built without requiring explanations about why I'd built it quietly. "What kind of business idea?" I texted back. "Something in retail, but focused on communities that don't get good options from big chains. Like stores that actually care about the people who shop there and the people who work there." His description was remarkably close to the business model I'd been implementing for years. Tyler had independently identified the same market gaps and customer needs that had driven my expansion strategy. Without knowing about my company, he'd envisioned exactly the kind of enterprise I'd been building. "That's an interesting concept," I replied. "What made you think about that particular approach?" "Just watching how different stores treat people. Some places make you feel like they're glad you're there, and others make you feel like you're interrupting their day. I think there's probably room for more of the first kind." Tyler's insight captured the fundamental principle that distinguished my stores from traditional retail operations. Customer experience wasn't just about product selection or pricing strategies. It was about creating environments where people felt valued and understood, where shopping became a positive interaction rather than a necessary transaction. "You're right about that," I responded. "Have you thought about what it would take to start something like that?" "A lot of learning about how retail actually works, probably, and understanding what communities really need versus what companies think they need." His response demonstrated exactly the kind of thinking that had guided my own journey from Walmart employee to business owner. Tyler understood that successful entrepreneurship required deep industry knowledge combined with genuine insight into customer needs. He'd identified the same foundation-building approach that had made my expansion possible. "Those are smart observations," I told him. "Maybe we should talk more about this over Christmas break." "I'd really like that. You probably know more about retail than anyone else in our family." Tyler's confidence in my expertise felt both validating and dangerous. He was recognizing capabilities that my parents and siblings had overlooked, but his recognition was based on limited information about my actual experience and achievements. If our conversation continued, I might face questions that would require either deception or revelation. The rest of Saturday evening passed quietly, with conference calls to regional managers and strategic planning sessions that represented the invisible side of my professional life. Tomorrow would bring another day of living parallel existences, maintaining the careful balance between public performance and private reality that had become both my greatest strength and my most exhausting challenge. But forces were aligning that suggested this balance might not be sustainable much longer. Sarah's questions about market trends, Jessica's recognition of my thoughtful choices, Tyler's interest in entrepreneurship, and the growing success of my business empire all pointed toward a future where my two worlds would inevitably collide. The collision was coming sooner than I expected, and it would begin with a photograph that would change everything my family thought they knew about who I was and what I'd been building while they worried about my future. Christmas morning arrived, with the kind of crisp winter sunshine that made everything look sharper, more defined. I stood in my apartment bathroom, staring at my reflection while deciding which version of myself to present to my family today. The Walmart vest hung on its usual hook, but today felt different. Today felt like the day when carefully maintained boundaries might finally collapse under the weight of accumulated secrets and growing recognition. The drive to my parents' house took me through neighborhoods where some of my stores operated, past shopping centers where Valley Fresh Markets had quietly revolutionized local retail experiences, while my family remained completely unaware of my involvement. Each familiar landmark reminded me of the strange double life I'd been living, the exhausting performance of being someone smaller than who I actually was. Tyler met me at the front door, his 16-year-old energy barely contained despite the early hour. Aunt Maya, perfect timing. I've been thinking more about that business conversation we started, and I have so many questions. Let's see what Santa brought first, I suggested, deflecting his enthusiasm while my mind raced through the implications of his continued interest. Tyler's questions were becoming more sophisticated, his insights more pointed. Soon, his curiosity might lead him to discoveries I wasn't prepared to explain. The living room buzzed with its familiar Christmas morning chaos, wrapping paper scattered across expensive carpets, coffee brewing in the kitchen, and that particular mixture of excitement, an obligation that characterized family gatherings. Jessica sat cross-legged near the tree, distributing gifts with the organizational efficiency she brought to everything. Michael managed the morning's documentation, photographing moments that would become next year's nostalgic references. Maya, honey, you look tired, Mom observed as she handed me a cup of coffee in one of her good china cups. Are you working too many hours at that place? That place. Even on Christmas morning, she couldn't bring herself to say Walmart without that slight tone of disappointment. As if the name itself was evidence of my failure to achieve something more respectable, more worthy of the education and opportunities they'd provided. I'm fine, Mom. Just busy with holiday retail season. Well, maybe after the new year you can look into some of those management training programs Michael mentioned. It's never too late to start thinking about advancement. Management training programs. The suggestion carried the weight of good intentions and complete misunderstanding of my actual situation. While Mom worried about my career stagnation, I was managing an enterprise that employed over 800 people across multiple states. While she encouraged me to think about advancement, I was making strategic decisions that affected entire communities and regional economic development. The gift exchange proceeded with its usual rhythm of surprised gratitude and careful consideration of appropriate reactions. Jessica had chosen thoughtful presents that reflected actual knowledge of everyone's interests. Michael's gifts came with stories about the research he'd conducted to find exactly the right items. My parents' offerings carried the comfortable predictability of people who'd been buying Christmas presents for the same family members for decades. When Tyler opened his gift from me, a high-quality business planning notebook and a subscription, to an entrepreneurship magazine. His face lit up with genuine excitement. "This is perfect, Aunt Maya. I've been wanting to start writing down all my business ideas, and this magazine looks like it covers exactly the stuff I want to learn about." "What kind of business ideas?" Dad asked with the patient indulgence. He showed toward Tyler's various interests and enthusiasms. "Retail stuff, mostly. I've been thinking about how stores could be better, how they could serve communities instead of just trying to extract money from them." Jessica laughed affectionately. "That's very idealistic, Tyler. But retail is ultimately about profit margins and operational efficiency. The community service aspect is nice, but it's not really sustainable as a primary business model." "Why not?" Tyler challenged, his teenage confidence refusing to accept conventional limitations. "What if treating communities well actually created better profit margins in the long run?" This was exactly the conversation I'd been hoping to avoid, the kind of discussion that might reveal too much about my own thinking and experience. Tyler was articulating the fundamental principles that had guided my business development. Principles that had proven profitable precisely because they challenged traditional retail assumptions. "Because retail operates on thin margins," Michael explained with the patient authority he'd developed during law school. "Every dollar you spend on community programs is a dollar that doesn't go to shareholders or business expansion." "But what if community programs created customer loyalty that generated more revenue than traditional marketing approaches?" Tyler persisted. "What if treating employees better reduced turnover costs and improved customer service quality?" Tyler was describing exactly the business model that had made Valley Fresh Markets successful, articulating insights that most MBA programs didn't teach because they challenged fundamental assumptions about how profitable businesses operated. His questions were becoming uncomfortably close to revealing the strategic thinking behind my own company's approach. "Those are interesting theories," I said carefully, "but implementing them successfully would require really understanding retail operations from the ground up." "Which is why your job is actually perfect preparation," Tyler said, turning to me with enthusiasm that made my chest tighten. "You understand how retail really works, not just the theoretical stuff they teach in business school. You see what actually makes customers happy or frustrated, what makes employees engaged or burned out." Tyler's observation hung in the air like a revelation waiting to be recognized. He'd identified exactly why my Walmart experience had been so valuable, why 7 years of working retail floors had provided insights that corporate training programs couldn't match. But his recognition also highlighted the contradiction between his faith in my potential and my family's concern about my choices. "Maya does have a lot of practical knowledge," Dad acknowledged, though his tone suggested this was more consolation prize than achievement. "Maybe she could use that experience to move into retail management or corporate training. Or maybe she could start her own company," Tyler suggested, with the confidence of someone who hadn't yet learned to temper ambitious ideas with realistic limitations. The room fell into one of those family silences where everyone processes an unexpected comment while deciding how to respond. Tyler's suggestion wasn't ridiculous enough to dismiss immediately, but it was ambitious enough to feel unrealistic, given their understanding of my current situation and resources. "Starting a retail business requires significant capital," Mommy said gently, her tone suggesting she was trying to encourage Tyler's enthusiasm while managing his expectations. "And Maya would need extensive business education and management experience." "But she's been getting business education," Tyler argued. "Just not the kind that comes with certificates and diplomas. She's been learning how things actually work, instead of how people think they should work." Jessica set down her coffee cup with the deliberate motion of someone preparing to address a misunderstanding. "Tyler, honey, Maya's retail experience is valuable, but running a business requires skills that go way beyond customer service and inventory management, financial planning, strategic development, regulatory compliance, human resources management." "How do you know she doesn't understand those things?" Tyler asked with the directness that only teenagers can manage without seeming rude. The question created another silence, this one heavier with implications none of them wanted to examine too closely. How did they know what I understood or didn't understand? How did they know what capabilities I possessed beyond what they'd observed during family gatherings and casual conversations? I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, I said, attempting to redirect the conversation before Tyler's questions led to territory I wasn't prepared to navigate. Starting a business is complicated, and there are lots of factors to consider. But you've thought about it, right? Tyler pressed. You must have ideas about how retail could be better, working in it every day. Everyone who works in any industry has ideas about improvements, I replied carefully. Having ideas and implementing them successfully are very different things. What kind of ideas do you have? Tyler asked. And I realized that deflecting his questions was only making him more curious about my thoughts and insights. Before I could respond, Michael's phone buzzed with what sounded like an urgent notification. He glanced at the screen, frowned, then looked up with an expression of confusion and surprise that immediately drew everyone's attention. That's weird, he said slowly. I just got a Google alert about Maya. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Google alerts meant news stories or public mentions or business announcements. Google alerts meant information that existed in public databases where family members could discover details about lives they thought they understood. A Google alert about what? Jessica asked, her voice carrying the sharp attention she brought to situations that required immediate analysis and response. Michael was scrolling through his phone screen with the focused concentration of someone trying to process unexpected information. There's a business journal article about successful entrepreneurs in retail. Maya's name is mentioned as the founder of something called Valley Fresh Markets. The silence that followed was different from the earlier pauses in our conversation. This was the silence of people trying to reconcile information that didn't match their understanding of reality. This was the silence of families discovering that someone they thought they knew had been living a completely different life. That can't be right, Mom said finally, her voice carrying the careful tone people use when they're hoping for reasonable explanations for unreasonable information. Maya works at Walmart. The article says she owns 47 stores across California, Nevada, and Arizona, Michael continued reading, his voice growing more uncertain with each detail. It describes Valley Fresh Markets as an innovative retail chain that's revolutionizing community-focused grocery operations. Tyler looked at me with an expression of dawning understanding and complete vindication. Aunt Maya, is this true? Let me see that article, Jessica said, reaching for Michael's phone with the urgency of someone who needed to verify information. That challenged everything she thought she knew. For 7 years, I'd imagined how this moment might unfold. In my various scenarios, I'd always pictured myself choosing the timing and controlling the narrative. I'd envisioned family dinners, where I calmly explained my business success after achieving some milestone that made the revelation feel natural and appropriate. I'd never imagined being exposed by a Google alert on Christmas morning while sitting in my parents' living room wearing a sweater that suggested nothing more ambitious than steady employment. Maya? Dad's voice carried the weight of someone trying to understand how fundamental assumptions about his daughter's life could be completely wrong. What's going on here? I looked around the room at faces displaying various combinations of shock, confusion, pride, and something that might have been hurt. Tyler's expression showed pure excitement and validation. Jessica looked like she was trying to solve a complex puzzle with pieces that didn't fit together. Michael appeared to be questioning whether the Google alert might be reporting about a different Maya Chen. Mom and Dad wore the expressions of parents discovering that their child had been living a secret life they couldn't have imagined. It's true, I said simply, because there was no point in attempting explanations that would only complicate an already overwhelming situation. I own Valley Fresh Markets. But you work at Walmart, Mom said, as if stating this fact clearly enough might resolve the contradiction. I do work at Walmart. I also own a retail chain that operates 47 stores and employs over 800 people. The numbers hung in the air like foreign language that everyone could hear, but nobody could quite translate into terms they understood. 47 stores, 800 employees. The scope of what I'd built while they worried about my career. Prospects was almost too large to process in the context of their assumptions about my life and capabilities. How is that possible? Jessica asked, and I could hear her analytical mind trying to calculate timelines and resources and strategic decisions that could have led to this outcome without anyone in the family noticing. I started 7 years ago with one small store, in Hemet. I've been growing the business gradually while learning retail operations at Walmart. You've been building a retail empire while we thought you were just working retail, Tyler said, his voice carrying wonder and excitement rather than confusion or hurt. That's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. Why didn't you tell us? Dad asked, and his question carried layers of emotion that ranged from pride to bewilderment to something that might have been betrayal. This was the question I'd been dreading and preparing for simultaneously. How do you explain 7 years of secrecy without revealing the family dynamics that made secrecy feel necessary? How do you tell people who love you that their concern for your future had been based on assumptions that made honesty feel impossible? Because every time I tried to talk about business ideas or retail insights, you encouraged me to think about more traditional career paths. Because when I mentioned that I was learning valuable things at Walmart, you worried that I was settling for less than I could achieve. Because the success I was building didn't fit the metrics you used to measure achievement. My explanation created another silence, this one heavy with recognition and regret. They were remembering years of conversations where they'd offered career advice to someone who was already implementing business strategies they couldn't have imagined. They were processing the reality that their concern for my future had been based on incomplete understanding of my present. Maya, Jessica said slowly, when I visited you at Walmart yesterday, you were helping customers and managing complex returns and demonstrating expertise that I thought was impressive for a floor associate. But you were actually the CEO of a major retail company doing customer service research. Customer service research and competitive intelligence and employee training and market analysis, I confirmed. Working at Walmart has been like getting a PhD in retail operations while running my own business. How successful is your business? Michael asked with the practical directness of someone who needed concrete data to process abstract concepts. Last year, we generated $38 million in revenue with profit margins that exceed industry standards. We're expanding into Texas. Next year, with plans to open 15 additional locations. $38 million in revenue. The number transformed the conversation from family confusion to business recognition. This wasn't a small side project or ambitious hobby. This was a substantial enterprise that competed successfully in a challenging industry while implementing innovative approaches that traditional retailers hadn't considered. You're a millionaire, Tyler said, with the directness that only teenagers could manage without seeming inappropriate. Several times over, I confirmed, because there was no point in minimizing the financial success that had grown from strategic decisions and calculated risks and years of careful business development. And you've been doing this while living in that apartment in Corona and driving that Honda Civic, Mom observed, her voice carrying recognition of the deliberate choices I'd made to maintain my cover story. Because building a business requires reinvesting profits rather than spending them on lifestyle upgrades. And because living modestly made it easier to avoid questions about income sources that would have led to conversations I wasn't ready to have. Dad sat back in his chair with the expression of someone trying to recalibrate everything he thought he knew about his daughter's capabilities and choices. Maya, we've been worried about your career for years. We've been encouraging you to think bigger and aim higher while you were already building something bigger than anything we could have imagined. I know. I said gently, and I appreciated your concern, even when it was based on misunderstanding my situation. But why keep it secret? Jessica asked. Why not share your success with people who love you and want to celebrate your achievements? This was the question that required the most honest and potentially painful answer. How do you tell your family that their love and concern had created an environment where honesty felt risky? How do you explain that their assumptions about success and achievement had made your actual success feel invisible and unrecognizable? Because every time I tried to talk about business ideas or retail innovation, you redirected the conversation toward traditional career advancement. Because when I mentioned learning valuable things at Walmart, you worried that I was limiting my potential rather than developing it. Because your metrics for measuring success didn't include the kind of success I was building. My words hung in the air like an indictment none of them had expected to face on Christmas morning. They were confronting the possibility that their love and concern had inadvertently created barriers to honesty and communication. They were recognizing that their efforts to encourage me had been based on assumptions that made my actual achievements invisible to them. We made you feel like you couldn't tell us about the most important thing in your life, Mom said quietly, her voice carrying recognition and regret. Not intentionally, I replied. But your vision of what my life should look like didn't include space for what my life actually became. Tyler stood up from his position near the Christmas tree with the sudden energy of someone who'd just understood something important. This is why you always asked such smart questions about business and entrepreneurship. This is why you understood retail better than anyone else in our family. This is why you were never worried about your future even when everyone else was worried for you. This is why I was confident that my choices made sense even when they looked questionable from the outside, I confirmed. The conversation continued for another hour, filled with questions about business development and strategic decisions and the practical details of building a retail empire while maintaining employment that provided cover and education. Tyler wanted to know everything about market research and competitive analysis and community engagement strategies. Jessica asked about financial planning and operational management and regulatory compliance. Michael inquired about legal structures and business partnerships and intellectual property protection. Mom and Dad listened with the complex emotions of parents discovering that their child had achieved remarkable success, while they worried about her failure to achieve more conventional markers of accomplishment. Pride mixed with regret, excitement, tempered by recognition that their concern had been based on incomplete understanding of who I was and what I was capable of achieving. As the afternoon progressed, the initial shock of revelation gave way to something that felt like genuine recognition and acceptance. They were beginning to understand that the quiet daughter they'd worried about had actually been the most successful entrepreneur in the family, that the woman they'd encouraged to think bigger had already been thinking bigger than any of them had imagined possible. When I finally left my parents' house that evening, carrying leftover Christmas dinner and a completely transformed relationship with my family, Tyler walked me to my car with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just discovered his favorite aunt was even more remarkable than he'd suspected. "Aunt Maya," he said as I loaded my car with gifts and leftovers, "would you consider hiring me as an intern next summer? I want to learn about retail from someone who's actually revolutionizing the industry." "I think that could be arranged," I replied, genuinely excited about the possibility of working with someone who understood that business success could be measured in community impact and employee satisfaction, as well as profit margins and market share. "And Aunt Maya, I'm really proud of you, not just for building a successful business, but for doing it while staying true to your values and priorities." Tyler's recognition meant more to me than any business award or industry acknowledgement I'd received. He understood that success wasn't just about financial achievement, but about building something that made people's lives better. He recognized that the most important accomplishments weren't always the most visible ones. The drive home took me past several of my stores, their signs glowing in the early evening darkness, serving communities that had become more vibrant and economically stable because of the jobs and services my business provided. Tomorrow, I'd return to Walmart for what might be my last shift as an undercover CEO. The secret that had protected my business development for 7 years was now public knowledge, which meant my most effective disguise was no longer sustainable. But the revelation had also brought unexpected gifts. Recognition from family members who finally understood the scope of what I'd accomplished. Validation from Tyler, whose faith in my potential had been proven justified in ways he couldn't have anticipated. And freedom from the exhausting performance of being smaller than who I actually was. 7 years of carefully maintained double life had finally collapsed into a single, integrated identity. Maya Chen, CEO of Valley Fresh Markets, who'd revolutionized community-focused retail while learning industry operations from the ground up. Maya Chen, whose quiet approach to business development had created opportunities for hundreds of employees and better shopping experiences for thousands of customers across 3 states. Maya Chen, who'd been told to think bigger by people who had no idea how big she'd already learned to think. The woman my family had worried about and the woman my investors respected were finally, completely, the same person. And that person was just getting started on building something even bigger than what anyone had imagined possible. 3 months. After Christmas changed everything, I stood in the conference room of my corporate headquarters in Irvine, watching the sunrise paint the California sky in shades of gold and amber. The building was one I'd purchased quietly 2 years earlier, a sleek glass structure that housed the administrative heart of Valley Fresh Markets, while maintaining the understated elegance that had become our brand signature. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the distant mountains that framed the landscape where 47 stores now served communities across 3 states. The transformation in my life since that Christmas morning revelation had been both dramatic and surprisingly natural. No longer hiding behind the Walmart vest, I'd embraced the public role of CEO with the same strategic thinking that had built my business empire in secret. But the change had brought challenges I hadn't anticipated, complexities that came with visibility and recognition that had been absent during my years of deliberate invisibility. Emma Rodriguez entered the conference room carrying 2 cups of coffee and a tablet loaded with the quarterly reports that would guide our morning strategy session. Over the past 3 months, she'd watched me navigate the transition from undercover entrepreneur to public business leader with what she described as impressive grace under pressure. The Texas expansion numbers exceeded our projections again, she announced, settling into the chair across from me with the satisfaction of someone reporting consistently successful outcomes. All 15 locations are operating above break-even. Point and customer satisfaction scores are tracking ahead of our established stores. The Texas expansion had become our most ambitious project, a test of whether the community-focused retail model we'd developed in California could translate successfully to different regional markets and consumer preferences. The early results suggested that prioritizing employee satisfaction and local sourcing created customer loyalty that transcended geographic boundaries and cultural differences. What about the employee retention metrics? I asked, reviewing the data visualizations on my own tablet while processing the implications for our upcoming Arizona expansion. Even better than Texas customer satisfaction. We're seeing 93% retention across all new locations, compared to industry averages that rarely exceed 70%. The local hiring strategy and comprehensive benefits packages are creating exactly the kind of workplace loyalty we projected. These numbers represented more than business success. They represented hundreds of families whose lives had improved because of employment opportunities that prioritized stability and growth over cost minimization. They represented communities that had gained economic anchors designed to strengthen local business ecosystems rather than extract resources for distant shareholders. My phone buzzed with a text message from Tyler. "Aunt Maya, just finished my First week of the summer internship program. This place is incredible. I'm learning more about business in 5 days than I learned in a full semester of high school economics. Tyler's internship had become one of the unexpected joys of my post-revelation life. Working with someone who understood that business success could be measured in community impact as well as profit margins had reminded me why I'd started this enterprise in the first place. His enthusiasm and insights were already influencing strategic decisions about employee development programs and customer engagement initiatives. "How's Tyler adapting to corporate life?" Emma asked, noticing my smile as I read his message. "Better than I expected. He's asking questions that challenge our assumptions about everything from inventory management to community outreach programs. Yesterday, he suggested a partnership with local schools that could create job training opportunities while addressing workforce development needs." "Sounds like entrepreneurial thinking runs in the Chen family," Emma observed with the dry humor that had made our working relationship both productive and enjoyable. "More than my family realized, apparently." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the conference room door. Marcus Thompson, my former Walmart manager, entered with the slightly uncertain expression of someone still adjusting to working in corporate headquarters after years of store-level operations. 3 months earlier, I'd offered him a position as director of store operations, recognizing that his practical experience and leadership skills would be valuable as we expanded into new markets. "Maya, I have the Phoenix store opening timeline, and there's something you should see," Marcus said, settling into a chair with the tablet that had become his constant companion since joining our corporate team. "Good news or challenging news?" I asked, though Marcus's expression suggested he was processing information that fell into both categories. "Both, actually. The Phoenix opening is ahead of schedule, and we're getting applications from current Walmart employees who want to transfer to our operation. The challenging part is that Walmart Corporate has started asking questions about our hiring practices and employee satisfaction metrics. This development had been inevitable from the moment my business success became public knowledge. Walmart had spent months trying to understand how a small regional chain was consistently outperforming their operations in overlapping markets. Now that they knew the CEO of their most successful local competitor had been working on their floors for 7 years, they were undoubtedly analyzing every interaction and decision for competitive intelligence insights. "What kind of questions?" Emma asked, her voice carrying the practical concern of someone who'd spent years managing corporate competitive analysis. "HR wants to understand how we're achieving retention rates that exceed industry standards while maintaining profit margins. That should be impossible given our employee compensation packages," Marcus explained. "They're also curious about our community sourcing strategies and customer satisfaction methodologies. In other words, they want to understand how we're succeeding by doing exactly the opposite of what conventional retail wisdom recommends," I observed. "Exactly. And they're discovering that conventional retail wisdom might not be as wise as they thought." This was the conversation I'd been expecting since Christmas. The success of Valley Fresh Markets challenged fundamental assumptions about how profitable retail operations should function. Our employee-first culture, community-focused sourcing, and customer experience priorities had created competitive advantages that traditional retailers couldn't replicate without transforming their entire business philosophy. "Are we prepared for increased competitive pressure from Walmart?" Emma asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "We're prepared for competition from anyone," I replied. "Our competitive advantage isn't based on proprietary technology or exclusive supplier relationships. It's based on treating people better than our competitors treat people. That's not something they can copy with policy changes or strategic initiatives." The truth was that Walmart's interest in our success validated everything I'd believed about retail potential during my 7 years of working their floors. Their recognition that our approach was worth studying confirmed that employee satisfaction and community investment weren't just ethical choices, but strategic advantages that created sustainable business value. My phone rang with a call from Jessica, who had become one of my most enthusiastic supporters since discovering my business empire. The revelation that her sister was running a successful company had transformed our relationship from concern-based to collaboration-focused, and she'd started offering marketing insights from her tech industry experience that proved surprisingly applicable to retail operations. "Maya, I just saw the article in California Business Journal about your expansion." "Strategy," Jessica said without preamble. "The reporter completely understood what you're building. This is exactly the kind of recognition that attracts serious investors and partnership opportunities." The California Business Journal article had been my first major media interview. Since the Christmas revelation, an opportunity to explain the community-focused retail philosophy that distinguished Valley Fresh Markets from traditional grocery chains. Speaking publicly about business strategies I'd developed in secret had felt both liberating and terrifying, but the response had exceeded my expectations. "The phone has been ringing constantly since the article published," I told Jessica. "Investment, firms, partnership proposals, acquisition offers. Everyone wants to understand how we're achieving these results." "Are you considering any of the acquisition offers?" "Not seriously. The companies making offers don't understand that our success isn't transferable to business models that prioritize shareholder returns over community impact. They want to buy our results without embracing our methods." This was the fundamental challenge of scaling a values-based business in an industry dominated by efficiency-focused competitors. The approaches that made Valley Fresh Markets successful required long-term thinking and community investment that quarterly earnings reports couldn't capture. Selling to traditional retail companies would inevitably compromise the principles that created our competitive advantages. "What about the partnership proposals?" Jessica asked. "Are any of those more promising?" "A few. There's a regional agricultural cooperative that's interested in expanding our local sourcing program, and a community development organization that wants to collaborate on store locations that could anchor economic revitalization projects." These partnerships represented the kind of growth strategy that aligned with our core values while expanding our market reach. Instead of competing directly with established retailers, we were creating market categories that emphasized community benefit alongside business success. The afternoon brought a conference call with potential investors from Austin, Texas, who were interested in supporting our expansion into additional southwestern markets. Unlike the acquisition-focused companies that had contacted us recently, these investors understood that our community-centered approach was our primary competitive advantage rather than an expensive luxury that limited profit potential. "We've reviewed your employee satisfaction metrics and customer loyalty data," the lead investor explained during our video conference. "What impressed us most was the correlation between employee engagement and revenue growth. You've created a business model that proves treating people well is profitable, not just ethical." "That's exactly right," I confirmed. The retail industry has operated on the assumption that employee costs and customer service investments reduce profitability. We've demonstrated that strategic investments in people create revenue streams that more than compensate for higher operational costs. "How scalable is this approach?" another investor asked. "Can you maintain these employee satisfaction levels and community relationships as you expand into larger metropolitan markets?" "Scalability requires adapting our methods to local conditions rather than standardizing procedures across all locations," I explained. "Each store needs to reflect its community's specific needs and preferences, which means our expansion strategy emphasizes local knowledge and community integration over operational uniformity." This was the insight that distinguished our growth strategy from traditional retail expansion models. Instead of replicating successful store formats in new locations, we researched each community's unique characteristics and designed store operations that served local needs while maintaining our core values of employee empowerment and customer satisfaction. The call concluded with preliminary agreement on investment terms that would support our expansion into Colorado and New Mexico over the next 2 years. The partnership would provide capital for store acquisitions and development while maintaining our operational independence and community-focused mission. As evening approached, I walked through the corporate headquarters building that had become the nerve center of an enterprise I'd once managed from my car during Walmart lunch breaks. The transformation felt both surreal and inevitable, the natural progression of strategic decisions and calculated risks that had accumulated into something larger than I'd originally envisioned. In the employee break room, I encountered several team members who'd joined our corporate staff after working in store operations, people who understood our customer service philosophy because they'd implemented it daily in their previous positions. Their conversations reflected the same commitment to community impact and employee satisfaction that had guided my original business development. Maya, called Sarah Kim, who'd accepted my offer to join Valley Fresh Markets as regional operations director after spending years trying to implement similar approaches within Walmart's more rigid corporate structure. The Phoenix store training program is exceeding all our expectations. The new employees are embracing our customer service model faster than we projected. Sarah's transition from Walmart regional management to our team had been one of the most significant recruitment successes since going public with my business ownership. Her experience with large-scale retail operations, combined with her appreciation for our employee-centered approach, had accelerated our expansion capabilities while maintaining operational quality. "What's driving the faster adoption?" I asked, genuinely curious about factors that might inform training programs for future store openings. "I think it's the difference between being told to provide good customer service and being empowered to solve customer problems," Sarah explained. "When employees know they have authority to make decisions that help people, they engage with their work differently." This observation captured the fundamental distinction between our approach and traditional retail management. Instead of training employees to follow procedures, we trained them to understand objectives and make decisions that achieved those objectives in ways that worked for specific situations and individual customers. Tyler appeared in the break room doorway, tablet in hand, and the slightly overwhelmed expression of someone processing more information than he'd expected to encounter during a summer internship. Over the past month, he'd rotated through different departments, learning about inventory management and customer service, and community outreach programs that connected our stores to local organizations and initiatives. "Aunt Maya, I just finished reviewing the community impact reports from our Arizona locations," he said with the enthusiasm that characterized his approach to every aspect of the business. "The economic multiplier effects are incredible. Each store is generating economic activity that extends way beyond direct employment and customer spending." Tyler's observation reflected research we'd commissioned to understand the broader economic impact of our community-focused retail model. The results had surprised even our most optimistic projections, demonstrating that businesses designed to strengthen local economies created value that extended far beyond their immediate operations. "What aspects of the impact data impressed you most?" I asked, always interested in Tyler's perspective because his questions often revealed insights that experienced retail professionals missed. "The way local sourcing creates supply chain relationships that benefit multiple businesses in each community. When you buy produce from regional farms, you're not just improving product freshness and reducing transportation costs. You're creating revenue streams for agricultural businesses that then spend money with other local companies." Tyler had identified the network effects that made community-focused business models more economically powerful than traditional approaches. By prioritizing local relationships over cost optimization, we were creating economic ecosystems that strengthened entire regions rather than extracting resources for distant corporate headquarters. "That's exactly the kind of systemic thinking that guided our original business development," I told him. "Most retail companies focus on direct operational costs without considering the broader economic relationships that affect long-term sustainability. Which is why your approach creates competitive advantages that other companies can't replicate," Tyler observed. "They'd have to change their entire business philosophy, not just adjust their operational procedures. As the day concluded and employees began leaving for their evening routines, I remained in my office reviewing strategic plans for the coming year. The expansion into Texas had exceeded projections. The Arizona openings were generating community, enthusiasm that translated into customer loyalty and employee applications. The upcoming Colorado and New Mexico developments promised to extend our market reach while maintaining the community integration that defined our brand identity. But beyond the financial success and operational achievements, the most meaningful transformation had been personal. No longer hiding my accomplishments behind a Walmart vest, I could finally integrate my professional identity with my family relationships and personal values. The exhausting performance of being smaller than who I actually was had been replaced by the authentic satisfaction of building something that reflected my genuine priorities and aspirations. My phone buzzed with a text message from Mom. "Maya, saw the California Business Journal article. Your father and I are so proud of what you've accomplished. We're sorry it took us so long to understand what you were building." Her message represented the resolution of tensions that had complicated our family relationships for years. The concern and career advice that had felt dismissive during my undercover years were now revealed as expressions of love and support, based on incomplete understanding rather than lack of confidence in my capabilities. I texted back, "Thank you. I'm grateful that you supported me even when my choices didn't make sense from the outside." "We should have trusted you to know what you were doing," she replied. "You were always the most thoughtful one in the family." The evening concluded with a video call to Emma, who was reviewing expansion timelines from her home office while her own family enjoyed dinner in the background. Our working relationship had evolved from business partnership to friendship that encompassed both professional collaboration and personal support through the challenges of rapid business growth. "Maya, I've been thinking about something," Emma said as she reviewed quarterly projections on her laptop screen. "When you started this company 7 years ago, did you envision it becoming what it is today?" "Honestly, no," I admitted. "I thought I was solving a specific problem in a small market. I didn't anticipate that the solutions would be scalable across multiple states or that the business model would challenge fundamental assumptions about retail operations. What do you think drove the success beyond your original projections?" "Probably the same thing that made my family worry about my career prospects," I replied, with the perspective that came from integrating my formerly separate worlds. I focused on building something that worked rather than something that looked impressive. I prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term recognition. "And now you have both sustainability and recognition," Emma observed, "which creates opportunities and responsibilities I'm still learning to manage." The conversation continued as we discussed growth strategies and market opportunities and the balance between expansion ambitions and operational quality that would define our trajectory for the coming years. Valley Fresh Markets had proven that community-focused retail could be both profitable and scalable, but maintaining that success required constant attention to the values and relationships that created our competitive advantages. As I prepared to leave the office, I looked once more through the conference room windows at the city lights that marked communities where our stores served customers and employed local residents. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, strategic decisions that would affect hundreds of employees and thousands of customers across multiple states. But tonight, I was simply Maya Chen, who'd learned to think bigger than anyone expected while building something that made people's lives better. The woman my family had worried about and the woman my competitors were studying were finally, completely, the same person. And that person was just getting started on transforming how an entire industry understood the relationship between profit and purpose, between business success and community impact, between individual achievement and collective prosperity. The retail revolution I'd started while wearing a Walmart vest was spreading to communities I'd never visited, creating opportunities for people I'd never met, challenging assumptions that had limited an entire industry's potential for positive impact. 7 years after walking into that first small store in Hemet with nothing but determination and a different vision of what retail could become, I was standing in corporate headquarters planning expansions that would extend that vision across the American Southwest. The quiet daughter who'd been encouraged to think bigger had learned to think bigger than anyone imagined possible. And the story was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.